I'm Samantha Copeland, as Wendy mentioned, and I work in ethics and philosophy. And I work at TU Delft in the Netherlands, and I'm also co-chair of the Serendipity Society, along with my newly appointed co-chair, Wendy. And so we can talk more about the society later, but I'm focusing on serendipity. If you're not familiar with it, it's the making of a discovery by accidents, and sagacity or wisdom is a way to explain it. But I'm sure you'll get my meaning. I can figure out how to change my so I wanted to talk about the role of the possible in how we generate and manipulate our moral imaginations in order to create possibilities for ourselves, and also to assess possibilities, to engage each other in different ways so that we can advance, morally speaking, so that we can engage new moral arguments, so that we can think of new ways to tackle old problems. And this is a case of one of those. So here we have kind of a pointed use of our moral imagination in order to get people to act, right? So it seems like climate change is not generating action overall because people can't imagine what's actually going to happen. And so we use these kinds of images in order to generate that possibility, right? So it's going to be drastic. It's going to be major. Here, look at how drastic and how major it can be. And now use that analogy in order to project the possibility on the rest of your world. And hopefully this will get a response, right? And that people will act. So this is one way that we kind of use the possible in order to generate moral action. But it happens in other ways as well. And the coronavirus has given us a perfect example of how the use of moral imagination can be generated by chance. So this is a tweet that came out, and Snopes will tell you that, you know, the swans were always there and the dolphins are photoshopped. But the point of the tweet and the point of the kind of response here to the original lockdown was a generation of hope and imagination, and also the deeming of what seemed to be impossible, which is getting a large number of people to behave completely differently than they had before, suddenly became possible through action. So by enacting the lockdown and by forcing us all to change our behavior, to take that sharp left in our directions in life, there was a response of hope in the sense of moral imagination, that we can now imagine all of society doing this kind of major action on a large scale because we just did it. Look, we can do it. So maybe we can do this intentionally as well. And we now have these possibilities of things like clean water in the Venice canals that seemed impossible before, but we see them enacted out in the real world. And so this is kind of a wonderful case of where serendipity, where an accident or an unexpected event actually generates a positive outcome that we weren't looking for. But we were kind of looking for this one, right? So I want to kind of point out that when we use the possible in this moral way, we often have intentions for the kinds of possibilities that we actually would like people to imagine. So I just want to put a pin in that for the end of the presentation. There are other ways that we generate these narratives, but this coronavirus impact and the generation of these new possibilities is really captured well by Arundhati Roy in this quotation from last April. I'm just going to read it because it's lovely. So whatever it is, the coronavirus has made the mighty meal and brought the world to a halt like nothing else could. Our minds are still racing back and forth, longing for a return to normality, trying to stitch our future to our past and refusing to acknowledge the rupture. But the rupture exists. And in the midst of this terrible despair, it offers us a chance to rethink the doomsday machine we've built for ourselves. Nothing could be worse than a return to normality. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and to imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So he's pointedly suggesting here that we're given a chance, we're given an opportunity by a chance event and unexpected events in order to reimagine our world, to see a new possible future. We do this in other areas with some intentionality, and we actually use this rhetoric in our moral lives, where we talk about the need to be able to imagine ourselves as different kinds of individuals in our future, and that this has a moral valence. So this image went viral after Kamala Harris was elected. And the idea is that now that there is a female Black vice president, female Black Asian vice president, she captures a lot of former impossibilities in her identity. We now see her in a place that was formerly thought to be an impossible place for those people to get to. And by seeing that and having that possibility imagined for us and visualized in this way by someone living it, we can now see it as a possibility for ourselves. And so we actively work towards generating those kinds of possibilities. And I just want to point out that in the tweet quote here, you say we can step into this next chapter of American history, this idea that we can, it's not just change that we can enact this way, but we can enact massive change. We can actually change the course of history. We can start a new chapter. So this idea of renewal, and it very much is in the tone of possibility, right? So we've opened up a whole new scope of possibilities for ourselves by giving ourselves this kind of moral imagination, material for our moral imagination. And I just want to point out the contrast between this picture and the one that it's derived from, which is a Norman Rockwell painting. And the idea in this painting, of course, is also a new possibility for the future. But I just kind of want to highlight that these possibilities are not always grandiose. And similarly with the climate change model, sometimes we want to highlight the impossibilities or the difficulties that still remain even within this new possibility. And here we have a case of that kind of nuance, right? So we have this capturing of a moment of possibility, a young girl getting to go to a school in a desegregated United States, and yet we're also reminded of the difficulties that come with that possibility as well. So there's this idea of imagination, but it's kind of a constrained use of our imagination, right? We don't want to just wander off into any possibility. We need to also attend to the moral context that we're working within. So I'm going to do a few long quotations here from an article in Counseling Psychology, and it came out in 2017, and written by Cross and Reinhardt, and it's a response to a number of other articles and a special issue on white attitudes, privilege, and multicultural development. And those articles touched on the experience of people teaching counseling psychology in educational institutions or in other institutions where they worked with people, and this idea of the linkage between gaining your own role as an ally in these situations and also communicating the education, and how do we get that kind of transformative experience to happen in others as well? How do we spread the word in that sense? And so while the articles tended to focus on the role of educators and the role of mentors, in this response article, they kind of neatly turn it on its head from the beginning, where they point out that the articles explore the evolution of white allies in a naturalistic and phenomenological way, as there's heavy reliance on current allies telling the story of their sojourn toward becoming relevant. So again, they point out that these are personal stories of personal experiences that they're sharing. And while mentoring played a critical factor in the evolution of many of the allies, serendipity best described the nature of a person's epiphany, trigger, or turning point. So there's a moral valence here to the kind of serendipity that has happened, where it's actually turned them towards the allyship that they now are trying to understand and to tell the story about, right? Interestingly, they tell it as a story. So we have this story of personal experiences that comes out in their narratives. There's several different kinds of examples they give of the kinds of encounters that the people share have made a significant difference in the paths they've taken. So aside from the power of mentoring, awareness and activism have been linked to these chance encounters. The luck of being in the right place at the right time, the unforeseen benefits of a particular mentor, an otherwise positive aftermath of being raised by a racist parent, one's personal reaction to reading a particular text, awareness gained through an analysis of society's treatment linked to one's invisible status, such as their sexual orientation, mental illness, or disability, enrollment in a particular course, or the aftermath of fortuitous activism. So I kind of want to point out that these are highly experiential encounters where people have met other people or come across other objects that are like a particular text that has been kind of integrated in their culture, but they have a unique and personal experience. So first of all, we have this idea of a personal narrative, a personal sojourn or journey towards allyship that's being shared as somehow exemplary, right? So this idea that you had to go through the story to get to where they are is very much part of the sharing of these experiences. But also I want to point out the interactivity in these examples, right? And the turning of the relationship. So the unforeseen benefits of a particular mentor. It's not just the mentorship, it's the plus that came from the mentorship that actually had the impact that they want to remark on. It's not just reading the text, it's the very personal reaction they had in that moment in time to that text. And awareness gained through analysis or gained through an encounter with others who are having different experiences. So Cross and Reinhardt point out that the evidence in the journal of all of these personal narratives being shared about how they reached their current state of awareness shows that the nature of the all-important trigger, which is described in these narratives as an encounter, is all over the map in its randomness. So I like this idea of encountering. Encountering is more than, since often in serendipity, we talk about increasing the chances of serendipity by increasing chance in general, right? So making people bump into each other more often down a hallway, or putting different people in a room together and seeing what happens. This kind of idea of increasing the chances themselves. But really what we're looking for is that encounter. It's not just the meeting of another person, it's not walking past them, it's not even saying hello or exchanging ideas. It's a significant meeting that we call an encounter. And when we come together with someone else and they shift our ability to see things toward a different turn. But what's random about that? I mean, so they want to highlight in their reflections on the cases that it's all over the map and its randomness. And I listed a number of different ways this encounter can happen. But I actually want to point out that I don't think it's actually random. And I'm glad this came up in the discussion just now, because in actuality, there's a lot that goes into making these encounters happen. And there's a lot that goes into making them encounters, right? You have to be ready to encounter each other to actually have that awareness happen. You have to have enough, a previous experience. You have to have enough trust in the situation or distrust in the situation, depending on the kind of encounter you're having. But it really is, it's more than simply a random coming together of two factors. It's a heavily loaded coming together of two factors. There is a lot of contingency that backs up that encounter and makes it possible, and also makes it morally what it is. When it has a moral impact, that heavy loading is very important as to giving us the nature of the moral impact. We talk about cases here that have gone right, but we could also talk about cases that have gone wrong. Morally speaking, where people have had an encounter and they have ended up going down a not so moral path in response because of the effect it's had on them. So it's not necessarily a morally positive encounter, right? That what it's loaded with is going to make a difference as well as to its outcome. So it is not random at all, I think. Actually, what we can do is tease apart the factors that are important. It's no more random than the kids you grew up with. The people you encounter, the people you see, the classes you take, the books you read, all of these are loaded through your own experience. They are all derived through the contingencies you've already experienced and towards the contingencies you will experience and how you'll experience them. So it may seem that, you know, you've encountered just the right people throughout your life, but it is neither random nor is it fully intentional. I kind of equate it to who were the kids in your neighborhood who you ended up playing with? Who were your parents' friends? What school did you go to? It's not random, but it also isn't your choice. So there's a boundary between, you know, intentionality and randomness here that we want to work within that kind of fuzziness. So in light of the fuzziness, I want to suggest that I think we can have a serendipity ethics. I think we can actually have an approach that actually based on the idea of possibility being the turning factor and the encounter being both loaded and also open to transformation. So let's say a 3-phase program is my proposal, that we can actually encourage the emergence of serendipity with ethical outcomes. And here's where the moral loading comes in. We need to load that encounter in the right ways. And I think that there's particular kind of approaches we can take to do that. So first, we need to open the space for the possible. This is not an easy thing to do, and I know many of you are actually working on that, where you need trust, you need all sorts of factors that go into creating a space for the possible among people within a context. So we need to allow the encounter to happen by opening up the space for the possible. People are allowed to explore what might be possible. It's not enough because it matters which direction we go in. The possibility is already, it's value laden. First of all, what we think is possible or impossible, as we were just discussing, is value laden. It has to do with our perspectives. But also opening the space for the possible might actually be quite different for different people. So we have to really attend to the people and their variances and what makes an encounter for them. Where are they coming from? And what is that encounter going to look like? So I don't think that's an easy task. It's not just having a room and everybody coming. I think there's much more loading we have to do there. And then we have to deliberate the adjacent possible. And I think we have to do that together. Once we say, okay, let's look at what's possible, we then have to think about what do those possibilities imply? What do they entail? What comes along with them? And here's where we really get to the morality of the possible. It's fun to imagine something possible, but once you start breaking down the consequences of that possibility, that's where you start to pull out, I think, the real normative elements of what people want to happen in their lives. And here we have to engage that possible as normative. We have to recognize that when we say, I think this is possible, I think that's impossible, why? What does this have to do with your expectations? How do your ideals play a role in defining the possible? And I really think that debate, deliberating the adjacent possible, is going to bring out a lot of aspects of that. And why do I say possibility is normative? Well, here I have my happy pigeons. But the words that they're using to describe the possible as alternatives, we've got feasible, likely, conceivable, practicable, probable, workable. As an ethicist, these are the kinds of words you look for in dialogue, right? You're like, oh, why do you think it's feasible? And once you start pulling apart the idea of feasibility, you pull out those normative elements of the possibility. And I really think engaging that is going to allow the kinds of encounters that we're looking for to emerge. This is all very speculative and sounds like a lot of fun. And if anyone has any ideas on it, I would love to hear. And I think I have 2 minutes left. Do I?
I think if it was only 15 minutes, you may have less than 2 minutes left, but beautiful picture.
Then thank you.